There's a city of light where there cometh no night, for the sun never sets in the sky. In the Bible we're told that the streets are pure gold, and the cool, gentle river runs by. I'm bound for that city, God's holy white city. Oh yes I am. I'll never turn back to this world anymore. No matter how rough may be the way, no matter how oft I stop to pray, I'm bound for that city on that evergreen shore.
Welcome, friends, to the Presby that never sleeps, the podcast that's always there for you in the darkness. For when you look into the Presbycast, you'll find that it's the Presbycast that looks back at you. It's Presbyterian. Chortles is here. If you're watching live, we've got some familiar faces and starting to become familiar second homes, it feels like, from our weird angles through which we gaze upon each other. That sounds way creepier than it was meant, but, you know, it's par for the course for us. But we've got a great show. Chortles and I were talking about this after our show went off the air last week. And this is like, I feel like one of those topics that was kind of made for us. Like sometimes the universe just kind of throws you a rope and you got to grab it and take it. And so we're excited to be here today talking with our guest and, guests, plural. But one's been here so many times that it's just like, you know, the pile of ants that forms in the corner because they always know where the crumbs are. So,
well, now Dr. Hart is just a panel member. He's not the featured guest.
Okay.
But he did bring a cat, so no one's surprised by this. And Dr. Hart, before we introduce our special guest, introduce us to the cat. Unmute there and tell us which cat we have.
This is Cordelia.
Cordelia.
She just took a bite and actually drew blood.
From you?
Yes.
Okay.
She did it again.
Well, okay. Well, that's a first.
She's
feisty.
She's
for the
They
old
are
show.
predators.
Well, we invited you to come
They
on
are.
because you have a special interest in our topic, which is New York City churches, church planning, things Presbyterian. Maybe it wasn't Presbyterian back in the time. Our guest, he was involved with maybe Presbyterian adjacent church planning. We're going to find out. He has a story. He has a story to tell, and as we often say, an authentically broken journey. And Kevin, go ahead and unmute yourselves and introduce yourself to the Presbyverse.
How's everybody doing? Cordelia with a C, the cat.
So this is our friend Kevin Vasquez. Tell us where you are. Are you in New York City now, or are you just nearby?
I am just nearby, about a 15-minute drive in Bergen County, New Jersey.
All right. So, there was, you're not old enough to remember this, but Dr. Hart is. Back in 92, Ross Perot was running for president, and he nominated as his vice presidential candidate Admiral Stockdale. And in the first debate, when he was debating with Dan Quayle and whoever was running on the Democrat ticket, I guess it was Gore, and he said, who am I? Why am I here? So that's our question for you. Who are you, and why are you here? How did you come onto the Presby radar? And we just start as far back as you like. You were born in the Bronx, is that right?
Yes, that's right. Born and raised in New York, and when you're born and raised in one of the outer boroughs of New York, that's as far from Center City, Manhattan, as any of these states. You know, I just the years and the inner schools, it's being raised in an Hispanic family, primary Spanish speaking, being raised in the life of a local storefront church, um, speaking multiple languages fluently, bussed into different schools in the system because they found out I could pass a few tests, and experiencing different neighborhoods, for example, in Center City, Manhattan, for my schooling. This is exactly like the type of thing in church planting was, at least at the time, you know, I was a church planter 10 years ago. At least at the time, this was the hot thing. You know, being able to bring together different cultures and experiences, being raised in a storefront evangelical church in the middle of the hood, with the winos right in front of the church, giving out the Bible tracts, volunteering from a young age, in all sorts of ministry, which was expected of children and young people in the 80s and 90s. That type of experience, along with just being fluent in multiple languages and cultures, gave you the contextualization, what do you call it, merit badge, and was very valuable to church planting. So that's kind of how I got on the radar.
You ticked all the boxes.
I ticked all the boxes as one of my fellow church planters who no longer is in the hood, moved away to take a job in suburban Washington, D.C., where I believe he's doing well. He used to say, he used to tell Dr. Keller himself, you can't teach me to be contextual. I was born contextualized. This was the type of thing this is what made it into the marketing videos on the City to City website, which he was on, and into all the all the fundraising material. So our culture, which was multiple cultures, English speaking, Spanish speaking, Hispanic, African American, because we were being raised in African American dominant neighborhoods, Caucasian, being able to speak the language of higher academia, all of these things put together made the gumbo. That's what made you. That's what set you apart. It wasn't a committee. It wasn't home missions. It was that you had these particular attributes that could attract people.
All right, so I'm interested. The church you grew up in, was it charismatic, or just sort of broadly evangelical? Yeah, I figured it was charismatic.
It was Pentecostal. It was Pentecostal, and if you take Pentecostalism and very, very, very broadly slice it right down the middle, it's been around 125 years, 120 years. Slice that right down the middle, 1960. You've got your neo-Pentecostalism since the 60s down on this way. My church was more in the tradition that is older. So it was Pentecostal, but it was quiet. Nobody was really speaking in tongues, though that was an important doctrine. And it was big on evangelism, very similar to maybe your IFBs, if that makes any sense.
Right.
Independent Fundamental Baptist. So we were in church 5 days a week. Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Sunday was the Lord's Day. Tuesday was men's worship service. Thursday was women's. Friday was youth. And on Saturday, we would gather together with other churches to do another service as well, which are all replicas of the Lord's Day service. So by the time I was 18 years old, I'd had been in as many services as somebody that's going only on the Lord's Day at the age of 60. That's how many services I've been in already. So
thank you for your service, sir.
I spent a lot of time in church, and I made it. A lot of people my age didn't, and this was also really important because you spoke the language of the neighborhood. So it was very important rescuing people from from these lost and broken congregations, from these silos. That was the language that was used. It was important for me, someone like me, to be able to create the avenues for people to come out of these silos and get into a nice new shiny church plant in the city.
So, how did you come to be drafted as from a very local, probably very a narrow familial type, almost Pentecostal church, into the big church planting New York City business? How did that happen? How did you come on someone's radar? And what was the network? Was it city to city? Was it Redeemer?
So back then it was Redeemer city to city, which I, unfortunately, sometimes I say that I've been corrected and I should stand.
Sorry, we lost you there for a minute. We got a little bandwidth issue with you, Kevin. We'll get him. We'll get him back. And Kevin, if you can hear, maybe restart or close down something on the side to help your bandwidth. He'll be back. Dr. Hart, this is piquing your interest, I've got to believe.
It is, but I have nowhere. I have nothing to say. I mean, I'm on the edge of my seat wanting to hear.
It feels like
the
we
answer
just
to
got
what
to
you
the
just-
end of like the first act where we're like, okay,
He'll
this
be
movie's
back.
going to be good. I want to see where it goes. We just got a really good extended trailer.
Yeah, we'll get him back in. If not, we've got a great, we've got another show down the line. So you would think they have pretty good bandwidth. Well, I don't know. He's not. He's in New Jersey, so gosh, who knows what could be going on in New Jersey?
Why would Chris Christie intentionally congest the bandwidth into this episode? I mean, this is nefarious. It's dastardly. And I simply won't stand for it. This aggression will not stand, man.
Here
So-
we go. He's back. All right.
Okay.
Are you with us now?
Yeah, how we doing here?
That's good. You're back. I knew you'd be back.
Oh man, sorry about that.
So it's New Jersey internet. That's the problem.
That's right.
So that's what we're going to blame
So
it on.
where were we?
Well,
where were we?
you were saying that I asked you what church planting organization sort of drafted you. How did that happen?
yes.
But which one was it? You were telling us it was probably City to City, which was a Redeemer thing.
Back then it was just called Redeemer City to City. I had left. I had left together with my family, my wife and my kids. That sort of environment that we were moved to another church. We had moved to New Jersey. We were looking for a church in New Jersey, and so we spent some time in a Baptist church for the first time in our lives for about a year and a half. And in that time, I'm thinking, well, I've been an elder, I've been a preacher, I've done ministry work. I really want to do something ministerial. I don't want to sit in the back of this Baptist church. I'm excited. I've got gifting, I've got abilities, and people are telling me, hey, why don't you plant a church? But I don't know who to go to. So somehow through these networking events, I don't have a journal of those times, but somehow through these networking events and email lists, I got connected to the Redeemer City to City Network. One of their newly minted executives at the time invited me for a conversation. We had a conversation. We got together. Another brother who, Dominican guy, knew the city fairly well, though he'd been out of it for some time, planting a church in the Caribbean. Became a close friend at the time, and he said, "Hey, man, why don't we plant a church?" At the time, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, Redeemer City to City, look at this website, look at this video, look at the testimonials, look at the things that are happening. This sounds like a great idea. Talked to my family, and from there, we started getting together with a core group that he was connected to at the time, and we started planting a church.
So what did the what was and of course, this was not a PCA church. I helped someone who was doing an article once, and it looked like to me that maybe 15% of the churches planted by city to city were PCA, and that most of them were not. They were Baptist, Anglican, Lutheran, non-denominational, charismatic. There was every kind of church you could think of.
Might be one of our, I think within our first 5 episodes ever, we were talking about this in like
Right.
2016.
Yeah. So a lot of people don't realize that. But how were you vetted? Was it just all about your experience, or was there some, how would it compare to presbytery vetting in the PCA or the OPC?
It would be as far as the east is from the west. It wouldn't even be, there is very little vetting. The vetting is having that sort of cultural awareness, being able to connect with people, being able to stand up in front of people. And even if your theology is not that great, that's okay. That was sort of like the vibe back then. And it's clear based on some of the executives that have come on over the years that the cultural cachet is really was the most important thing. Being able to gather people, being able to be entrepreneurial, being able to connect with them, and being able to share stories. So the crafting of stories was a big deal in the whole training process that I was involved in. But in my experience was very unique and different in one way from many of the other planters. It was more like, he's with me. That was the vibe with I'm working with a guy who's on the senior staff at Redeemer City to City. So anybody that this is, they'd heard about me. This is Kevin Bell. You're planting with, how did you get to be a co-planter with this guy? And it was basically his cachet that got me in there. And yeah, this is Kevin. He's going to be planning a church. I'm going to be joining his church. And there was a lot of excitement around that because, it was going to be a church in Washington Heights. We were going to do big things, multicultural, multilingual. So we were doing things in Spanish and in English. Because I was perfectly fluent in both, I can teach and preach and speak in both languages. And so that was a very valuable tool, as not all church planters, even the ones who are bilingual, are able to do this type of thing in both languages. So it took off very quickly with a lot of events in the neighborhood, a lot of invitations to dinners in spaces that we were renting out, a lot of connectional things. So the vetting process was not existent. If you can, I did not stand before a presbytery. No church body actually called me. And I think one of the scariest things is that many months later, I discovered that he himself, though this executive at Redeemer City to City, and I say this because this is a public story which he has shared publicly before in sermons, etc. He himself was not a duly ordained man. When he was asked at City to City, "Hey, are you ordained? You got to be ordained to take this job." He called a friend in New Jersey, a pastor at some independent, unaffiliated church. "Hey, can you ordain me?" That's the way he got ordained. And this was the guy managing dozens of church planters, me being one of them, and the one closest to him because we were planting together. And me, wide-eyed, I'm coming out of a very charismatic system. I don't know what a presbytery is. I don't know what it is to be duly ordained. I don't know what it is to be examined, which are things that I've experienced since then. I was not reformed at the time. But I was coming into this reformed world, and what was very attractive for me was like being able to spend time with people like Tim Keller and the men that were part of the PCA, but I wasn't becoming part of the PCA. That wasn't even in the question. Very few planters were connected to the PCA and through the streams of revenue and financial support that could be provided through some pretty famous PCA outlets.
So let me ask, did they much care what you were teaching and preaching?
Yes, but not for what you'd think.
So we're talking about a very lowest common denominator evangelical message.
But my training was very much feeling the felt needs, that whole Christian community development vibe, that whole John Perkins world of reaching people based on the needs in the neighborhood, and very seeker sensitive. That was what was taught in my preachings and in my teachings. That was the main focus. I still remember our first pre-launch service, which is a service that you have before you actually officially launch the church. I wanted to give a sermon on, or an exhortation, I would say now, on the visitation of the angel at the pool of Siloam. You guys remember that one? And the resistance that I met was the neighborhood would not accept this message because it has too many supernatural elements that they would not understand and they would reject. Give something about the Good Samaritan. Give something about, if you can hear all the mention off here, Christianity and liberalism, right? This was what was sought for. This was the main thing that was sought in my preaching and teaching through the mentorship I was receiving.
I want to ask some questions about the money and maybe the organization, but I'm sure by this point, Dr. Hart has some questions to ask about what was going on at this time.
So the first question is, just what year is this roughly? 10 years ago? 5 years ago? 15? When you're starting the church plant?
This is very specifically 2013 to 2015.
Okay. You said New Jersey, but then you mentioned Washington Heights. So how urban are those? And, you think of urban, you think of the 5 districts in New York. And so how did that play into this? Were these areas sufficiently urban? They must have been, but.
Well, yeah, Washington Heights is a neighborhood of Upper Manhattan. It's in the heart of New York, perhaps not Center City, but it's as urban as you can get. Known as the Little Dominican Republic, and that's where I was raised, partially.
Okay.
So, and that's where I'd been attending church for a number of years. So that was the neighborhood I was most connected to, versed with. And I had just moved to New Jersey at the time, about 15 minutes away, commuting into the neighborhood that we were looking to plant the church in.
Okay.
And my neighborhood's suburban, just straight up suburban.
Right. Okay. So what you just said though about the supernatural seems odd in a way, because I don't want to stereotype people who would be of Dominican or even Puerto Rican backgrounds, but I would think that in those communities, in those neighborhoods, the supernatural would be fairly common. It wouldn't be a turnoff, as it were. This is how part of the appeal, in my understanding, of charismatic or Pentecostal churches. So I would think that being supernatural, or going to a text that had a supernatural component to it explicitly, would be appealing to those people. Maybe not understood in the same way that you would understand it now, or that Reformed people would. But so the counsel you seem to be getting would seem to make sense for a more downtown Redeemer congregation, where the professionals would be put off by that sort of thing, but the people in the hood, as it were, wouldn't put them off. Or is that unfair to think of it that way.
You're not, you are not mistaken. That you're. I think you're exactly right. I think that with me, the emphasis was the name he had for me was diamond in the rough. The thinking was, I've got to take this young man and I've got to detox him off of what he's been doing his entire life, the last 30 years of his life. I've got to detox that and mold him into someone that can tell the narratives that were most important, which is feeling the felt needs of the neighborhood, reliving their narratives out through our stories, because they're just stories that we use to amplify whatever the felt needs are in the neighborhood. So it was as much about transforming me into the image of what was desirable in a church planter. And so I think that that was part of the reason why let's veer off of that. Let's go Good Samaritan. Let's go with, any sort of story which presents, the Lord as giving sympathy to people on the way, etc. And it was also important to create this particular church plant in the image of the congregation that this brother had been leading in the Dominican Republic for the previous 20 years, and connecting in particular networks coming out of Latin America, coming out of Chicago, like the Christian Community Development Association. This was going to be an embodiment of all of the networks that he had been connected with for a number of years, and having that set up shop in New York City, which I was the first, but I was not the last that the experiment was made upon. And many planters tried and did not succeed. For some reason, it did not work in the city. So yeah, you wouldn't be off.
These weren't Protestant liberals by any means that we're dealing with here. This is not the people that Machen, was that were didn't believe in the supernatural, obviously, but it does sound a lot like a social gospel of sorts, a conservative social gospel. Is that fair? I mean, that I can't really think of any other way to describe it.
I think it's totally fair. I think that's exactly what we're being given. I remember being in meetings at Redeemer, where, I'm sorry to say Redeemer, I do not mean Redeemer Presbyterian Church. I want to make sure that that's clear. I keep saying Redeemer because that's what it was called, Redeemer City to City. So let's try to say City to City. Being at City to City and NAPARC representatives, just people that come in and connect, because anybody could come into these meetings, would come in and say, is this not the social gospel that you guys are talking about? And there being some recorded, probably you could find them online, some heated exchanges, that no, it's not the social gospel, but it's the social implications of what the gospel does. So that was the fine line. But at this point and at this juncture, absolutely, it's all social gospel, which I'd never heard about before. And I was learning. I was learning on the run, so to speak.
Dr. Hart?
I also wondered if it could be a kind of psychological gospel. I mean, talking about felt needs, we've been in a very therapeutic kind of society for a long time, with your favorite word there, Brad, of broken and victimhood. And if you're ministering to people who are in some ways on the margins, it's not merely their financial or economic needs. It could be also needs with coping, et cetera, in a society. So I wonder if that might also be a way of thinking about it, rather than just a social gospel, which has more economic or political connotations. Just an observation. You don't have to say it.
Yeah, no, but I do agree that was certainly part of it at the time. It's interesting that so many planters, brothers, so many of them are not in those churches anymore. When I separated from this whole church planting project finished for me, I was one of the first in our just general group of church planters, but now all of them, almost to a man, including the man that I was looking up to, city to city executive, somebody that was older than me that could provide some mentorship up until this point in my life, which I was in my early 30s. Up until that point in my life, I had to guide many of my pastors and elders and teach them and be their teacher and be a Sunday school teacher and provide pulpit supply just because I was able to do it. Well, here's a guy that I can look up to like a hero. This guy, obviously he's successful. He's in a place that, me, wide-eyed, possibly a little bit naive and desiring to be active. And so many of those church planters that also felt in a similar way, they're just not. Some of them wrote books about dying well in the hood. We're going to live here for the rest of our lives. And they wrote books about it and published it. Men who are not even 35 years old. They're gone. They're living in the South now, working at a suburban church. I know multiple men like that. Something didn't pan out with the renewal of the neighborhood. Something didn't pan out with the great movement that we were doing. And most of those guys are wrecked, including the network that my co-planter left me to go join. That entire network, the whole Trinity Grace network went belly up in the air as well. Which Dr. Keller called the next great movement, the next great gospel movement for the next 50 years in a New York Times article. We, the have-nots, the smaller church planters, we were not connected to all of the same resources as some of these planters that were putting out big outfits, well-funded, getting in front of Spanish River Church down in Florida. That was a big thing. I couldn't tell you much about it because I never even got close to there. I was in the bleachers.
Well, maybe you were the value proposition.
Whatever it may be.
You were the Costco church plant, maybe.
The Costco church plant, but a lot of guys didn't make it. And I just thank God that I was able to get out a little bit earlier. But I seen them, people have posted on social media. I see the things that they have to say. I see the brokenness and the hurt as a result of having gone through these years of church planting in this sort of fast times at Ridgemont High type of way.
So the Trinity Grace, I've been following this since about, and this man on the call here, Dr. Hart, he probably got me interested in all these things back in around 2009, 10. And I was familiar with the Trinity Grace Network. It was a subset of Redeemer, city to city. And what were there, maybe 5 churches?
I would say about 11 or 12.
Okay, that many.
Not churches, brother.
Oh, okay.
Parishes.
Sorry. Parishes. Okay. I thought you were going to say communities or worshiping communities. That's the PCUSA model, the worshiping communities. Yes. So that's all gone now.
Yeah. About a year and a half into this adventure of renting out space, very carefully curated space. We were worshiping within the context of a children's nonprofit in Washington Heights, so it was all very wonderful for the videos and photos because here we are doing church, but it's also a nonprofit and we're serving them and they're helping us. About a year and a half into the process, I'm called into a meeting somewhere in Midtown Manhattan with my co-planter and John Tyson, who is the head of the Trinity Grace Network, whatever you want to call it, talking about I had no idea I was walking into a meeting that was looking to recruit my church plant into that network because it was time to affiliate. So if really just like an inversion of everything that as NAPARC people, like now after we've started a church, gone public with no grounds to exercise the ministry publicly, with everything, nothing legitimately done. Okay. Now we got to affiliate because, that's the only way the donors are going to give the money. You got to find a home. You don't have a tribe. And this was going to be it.
We lost you there for a sec.
Figure.
Come back, Kevin.
Yeah, we lost you for a minute. So you would. So they wanted you to affiliate with someone. So is it fair to say that being with kind of the sexy network was better than choosing some existing denomination or something like that? But he'll be back. All right, Dr. Hart, your reaction to what you've heard so far. Is it what you thought was going on in New York, or is it even weirder than that?
Well, it sounds a lot like there's a really great podcast from about 7-8 years ago about church planning, a church in Philadelphia in Almy.
A startup. It was kind of on the startup business model. Yeah.
Right. And the journalist's name, but this all sounds very similar to that. Although I can't make sense of all these different networks, and especially we haven't gotten to the money yet, but where the money is coming from. I mean, Spanish River comes up a lot in these discussions, but I mean, do they have millionaires that are members, and those millionaires give lots of money? Anyway, Kevin's back, but
yeah, we'll talk
the
about
money.
We'll talk about the money. I think that's interesting. But what I wanted to ask was it better to get into one of these kind of, the hot thing network? Was that better than affiliating with some existing denomination? I mean, it was more agile, right?
I think on a case-by-case basis, it could be, but I think as long as I joined anything. So I was pushed to a Swedish Lutheran denomination. I forget the name of it.
The ECC.
The ECC, the Evangelical Covenant Church. That was big. Mm-hmm. That was big. I was sent to meetings. Go check that out. Maybe you'll like that. At the time, I had only known, the only denomination that I knew about was the SBC, because I had visited an SBC church for about a year before all this happening. What about the SBC? Not them. Don't go in that direction. Though we had SBC.
There you go.
We had SBC planters in, but these are SBC planters that were sent by, big SBC seminaries from the South that were coming up with their whole team, well-funded, with a little bit of Acts 29 injected into this. So the SBC guys that were existing in this, city-to-city network were already very well positioned. And for me to just jump in and say, hey, I'll join the SBC, that probably wasn't the best idea. But as long as I joined anything, but of course, my partner wanted, obviously he wanted to join TGC. And so that's, I think, the thing that got the most push. I sat down with him in a coffee shop right after this meeting, and I said, brother, these people, with all due respect, are they're reformed for the fundraisers, for the money. They're Roman Catholic in their expression, calling themselves parish, and it's, I guess, casting this wide lowest common denominator and social net. They're charismatics when you walk into the church, So they're a little bit of everything. And I was like, how can you think? That was my question. This was very, this was challenging, right? Because sort of like, it was a mentor to mentee relationship, and all of a sudden the mentee is speaking out. Like, brother, how can you think I would join you to do something like this? One thing led to another. The conversation ended abruptly. And within 10 days, I not only received his resignation letter from our leadership board, but I lost more than half of the core group that had helped us to plant the church, which the church had been designed to be planted as English and Spanish speakers. So we had everybody from pure English speakers to pure Spanish speakers. I was left with 25 mostly elderly Spanish speakers. So all of a sudden, the church was complete. And not long after that, the Trinity Grace Washington Heights new church plant appeared on the map, and we were basically just cast to the side. I was left without what you call a critical mass in the city-to-city lingo. A critical mass is what you need to be able to plant a church, kind of like that. The minimum which you need so that the church doesn't just fall apart, because you need a certain amount of volunteers, etc. I was left with 25 people, so my church plant, which had been working, I had developed some committees and some small groups ministries, was now relegated to a small group with
Wow.
with no idea where we were going.
So your members were poached, essentially. I mean, they came and got your members and put them somewhere else.
That if I can call them my members, for I was never duly ordained.
Right.
When I became a member of the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, I wrote a letter to the session renouncing every practice and doctrine that I had ever preached previously, because I was ashamed of these things. Are on the record. Our minister said, "Kevin, we're going to put it on the sessional records. Thank you."
Okay. All right. I sort of buried the lead. I didn't tell everybody you're in the OPC now. So, and you're a real. We'll get to that, but you're a ruling elder.
Yeah.
So we have two OPC ruling elders, you and Dr. Hart. We could call you all the odd couple, I guess, and on the show tonight. So let's talk about the money before we talk about how you got out of this.
Before you go there, Brad,
go ahead. Yes.
Just one. I mean, I don't want to get too, precious about this. But when they were talking to you about joining a group, any tribe, hang your hat somewhere, did they come to you like with a page and there were 12 different groups? Did they send you to a website? Was there a directory with 100 different groups? I'm curious how big the choices were that you could pick from.
Well, the good question. There was no page. Everything was very much word of mouth, and it was connecting with whoever we were chummy with at the conferences that we were going to. There was a lot of conference attending,
right?
And at these, you can imagine the cigar-filled rooms, and whoever. Hey, what are you part of? Hey, maybe we can connect into that. And there was a lot of that sort of backroom conversation, but there was no actual sheet of paper, and certainly not officially from city to city. City to city never got its hands dirty with what was really going on at the granular level, where the planter is. That was through they would do that through their coaches and the men who were working directly with us. But neither the PCA nor the local Presbyterian nor Redeemer Presbyterian Church, they never ever were down there in that conversation. It was always through these intermediaries who acted as coaches and trainers in their development programs, which I went through 2 of those programs.
So,
Thanks.
Was there ever anyone in Redeemer who said, so Redeemer Presbyterian Church, its success allowed it to form this city-to-city church planting network. Redeemer was largely planted with money from Spanish River in Florida, a big PCA church. And I think city-to-city was trying to replicate that model with the city expertise in the global city emphasis. But was there ever anything in the training that said, we're willing to work with all kinds of people because we want to reach all kinds of people, but the Reformed theology is the best, and Presbyterian church order is the best and most biblical, and Reformed worship is the best? Did you ever hear that one time?
I never heard that it was the best, though I was getting some of it. Because, for example, the two programs that I was in, the incubator program and I forget what the other one is called. It's a 2-year program. In these programs, we were receiving content on, it was basically Center Church, the book by Tim Keller, divided into modules. So whatever is doctrinally reformed about that book, which there was a good amount, that's what we were getting. And we were meeting on a weekly basis with trainers where for example, me coming out of the context I'm coming from, I'm not coming from a P&R background. So for me, it was like, this is incredible. This is amazing stuff. I'm learning something that I've never been able to learn before because, Reformed seminaries weren't, knocking on the door in Washington Heights or the South Bronx, the neighborhoods I was growing up in. So for me, it was amazing. And then once a month, back then, afterwards, City to City canceled this. Once a month, we got to meet with Dr. Keller himself. And that was awesome because he was excellent. The man was a walking encyclopedia. And, at first I'm looking like, is this guy for real? There were moments where he was very pastoral, like when I had to bring my kids with me. I didn't have a babysitter, so I had to bring them with me to one of the training events. I thought, this guy's going to look at me like I have a second head coming out of here. He was very pastoral, and he was like, I understand. I've been through that. Or when one of our church planters quit in the middle of a meeting with Tim, he didn't quit like that morning. I got to quit this. I can't anymore. And the guy started closed his notebook and started shepherding him right there. I thought that was for me like a learning experience. Like, wow, so this is it. I've arrived, There was modules. I still have some of that paperwork with me. You were saying?
Yeah. So, but it sounds like sort of the theology you got was just sort of here and there. It was kind of incidental, osmosis, and you probably had to kind of want to get it, I mean, it was very much a young, restless, and reformed model where it was pretty loose.
Absolutely. I started going down the rabbit trail because the last time I ever met with Dr. Keller, I said, Dr. Keller, because we were allowed to bring questions. Like, here's my question: how can I learn more about Reformed theology? And he said this, Kevin, study the 3 Johns: John Murray, John Frame, and John Stott. And because he said John Murray first, I said, let me see who this John Murray guy is. I never got to Frame and Stott. I have read a little bit of Frame for, as a student at Westminster. I've had to read Frame for a couple of things, not much. But I said, let me start with Murray. And when I started reading Murray, that's where everything just opened up, and I started connecting a lot of things on my own. And this whole theme, my whole life theme of being an autodidact and having to teach myself, just sort of continued while I was falling apart.
So you were on the verge of being connected with this Trinity Grace Network, and then it sort of fell apart because you sort of had issues of conscience. You thought it sounded like you had learned enough to know that this wasn't exactly the way to go. But I think before we get into that, where did the money come from? Where does Redeemer City to City's money come from, and how was it parceled out?
I can honestly say that I never knew exactly where. The only thing I ever heard about was Spanish River. it was like, put it like this, and I'm gonna give you my own subjective, could be completely wrong, but this was my point of view, which I shared with other planters, and they said, Kevin, you're wrong. That can't be it. That can't be true. This is what I thought, and I don't say that this is a fact. This is what I thought, and what I believe to this day. There must have been 30, 40, 50 church planters across all 5 boroughs of New York City. But what it seemed like to me is that a certain percentage at the top, the guys that were, building out the G3s in Brooklyn, and, that were building like Trinity Grace parishes, guys that were like bigger on this and pulling in hundreds and hundreds of people in their pre-launching phase, it seemed like the funding went to them. They got the invitation to connect with these funders, of which the only one I ever knew specifically was Spanish River. The other 25, 30 guys on the bottom, which I was one of those guys, because I'm bringing 40 people, which for me now, 40 people to start a church plant sounds amazing, right? But 40 people is not a critical mass. A critical mass was 70 people. You got to have 70 people to really run a church. For little guys like us, we never saw the money. I was told to sell my house. I was told to leave my job because, people will only invest and follow if you're really into it full. I was told to do all these things without having a salary. There was no salary. There was no love offerings. You're shaking your head there, right, brother? But then also, I was not empowered to at least go out and fundraise. I wasn't given. I'm the type of dude that if you put something in front of me, the next day I can pretend to do it, right? I can absorb. My brain is like a sponge. I can put it out and communicate it. I could have at least done that. I wasn't even given that ability. So we were scrounging. Those are difficult times. Imagine looking at your wife. She's thinking you're on this church planning dream. I backed it up, but where's the money coming from? What's this looking like over the next couple of years? Oh, it's coming. It's coming. Oh, we're going to connect. Let's join a network first. Let's join a denomination. And so I was strung along financially and never saw a penny. I think I was given $25 a week at one point for the toll and the gas from my house in New Jersey. But in terms of a salary and actual income, 2 small children, a wife, a mortgage to pay, none of that disappeared. And then all of a sudden, when it was time, okay, we're latching onto a network, we're considering, the first time I said, no, we can't do this, I was left in the wind, a resignation letter in the mail. Every single person that could help out in committees in a core group, gone. I was left with the 25 Spanish speakers that really couldn't do much. They weren't able to do assimilation strategy or help to, help to, they weren't able to do these things, right? So these guys weren't offering and tithing, right? So we were put in a very, very, very difficult circumstance, which eventually 6 months later led to the closing of the plant itself. I tried to connect with the SBC, because that's kind of like, this is kind of like a safe option. This is what I knew, but the plant was sabotaged. You see what I mean? It would have to be redone completely from scratch because we had already launched the church. It had a name. It was incorporated. Marketing all over the neighborhood. Look at these terminologies of marketing, etc. Right? All over the neighborhood. So I never saw the money. I didn't know where it was coming from. I had heard the name of Spanish River, but I was basically just standing with my hand out, hoping for. I didn't have a presbytery to appeal to. This guy was my presbytery.
So what happened to the members? I mean, the attenders of the church plant.
The ones that left in the poaching.
Well,
became part of the New Trinity Grace Network,
which crashed.
Let's not even go there yet. Maybe we will, but I'm glad I didn't join that network because I feel. I mean, with what credibility? 2 years later, it was gone. So the 25 people, I made sure they got into churches. So there were other planters in the Bronx where some of these families were coming from that I knew, and I entrusted several families to one particular planter who stopped planting and went back into musical production in the last couple of years. So that's another one that didn't continue planting. And then others, I made sure that all of them were in a congregation.
But that probably that probably wasn't the normal way, though. I mean, a lot of these people in a lot of these failed church plants, people are just cut loose, right? I mean, you got to think about that at night. What happened to all these people who were in this system 10 years ago?
Yes, and thankfully, like the ones that I've been able to keep in contact with over the years, thankfully, most of them are in churches to this day. Some of them have visited me in other churches that I've been involved with. So I definitely, there was no way I could leave these people, high and dry. So I made sure that they were in good congregations, and it was just painful. And think about it. This is the first time, guys, that I've ever spoken about this publicly. I couldn't bring this to city, even though I knew exactly what was going on. For multiple reasons. Number one, it would have defamed the name of Christ. Number two, it would have defamed the name of the church. Number three, it would have caused disarray, like it would have caused, disrepute to come upon all of us. And it was just super embarrassing as well. Just me as a human being, as a regular guy, I was super ashamed. A failed church plant. I thought I was going to wear a scarlet letter for the rest of my life. But to this day, I'm thankful for it, because I wouldn't be where I'm at right now.
Did you ever sell your house?
Which is, say it again.
Did you sell your house? Did you sell your house?
I did not. I put it on the market. No, we never had a buyer. If I had sold this house that I'm in right now, brother, who knows if I'd be in my marriage? Who knows if my marriage would even be intact? Because who sells their house to run a church with no proper income, with no proper financial support? And it was a good thing, it was a good thing that things worked out the way that they did. But I learned some heavy lessons, brothers. And it's part of the reason I'm where I'm at today. When I came under care of my presbytery, I'm not only a ruling elder, I'm under care for ordained ministry as a minister. One of the questions, and this might be a common question in the OPC, is why are you choosing the OPC? Why us? Why would you come to us? And my answer was, I'm not smart enough to go anywhere else, and kind of make things up on my own and try to figure these things out. To be in the citadel, I need to be on solid ground. I need guidance and I need care to do things the right way. And that's all I've received ever since in being guided towards ordained ministry. Becoming an ordained, all I've received is guidance and care. I've been asked about planting churches, because I did learn a lot about planting churches. I did learn a lot, and so I think there's a bright future. And I think it's because of some of these lumps that I had to take on the way. Hard-headed me, right? These were hard lessons to learn, hard for a marriage to take. And hard, especially coming out of, there were transitions prior to church planting, coming out of the church experience we'd been in before, looking for a foundation. So eventually I got a call from my brother, Timothy Brindle, associate pastor in the PCA. Kev, what about seminary? Have you thought about it? And so I ended up, after all this, I ended up going to seminary at Westminster Theological Seminary. I think that changed my life. I'm still in my fourth year. I'm going little by little part-time. I haven't graduated. I'm somewhere in my fourth year, but I am going little by little. And none of these things would have happened. None of these awesome. I wouldn't have become reformed if this hadn't happened. I wouldn't have learned our deep and rich history. I wouldn't have learned the history of the church. I would never have learned original languages, which is what I play with all day. I'm always working with the Greek and the Hebrew and learning new things. I would never have learned presuppositional apologetics and all the things that I enjoy. So I wouldn't have this library behind me. So I'm grateful for the experience, but it was a bitter and hard experience, if you can gather.
Do you think things have changed in the church planting world since 10 years ago? I know that probably COVID was really hard on those. I mean, what was the success rate of city to city associated church plants? Was it 10%, 15%?
It might be lower. It might be lower.
Wow.
Because a lot of the church plants were open, but they were open and trying to launch or launched, but foundering. I had a guy that replanted 3 times. When you replant, you set the clock back to year 0 in the funding. So if you go back to year 0, you can say with integrity, we're in year 0. You want to help us out for the next 7 years? So even though they were open, they were like zombie churches, right? It was just like trying to stay alive. And I say that, by the grace of God, many of them are brothers who are saved and love the Lord, and never to denigrate the honor of any brother or sister in Christ. But these churches were falling apart at the seams, except for, the top 5% that were, having the fancy balcony dinners in downtown Brooklyn with 100 people in it and filling up Sundays with 300 or 400 people. Those people were doing well, but the rest of us were really struggling. So I would say that church planting world probably has changed a lot because of COVID. COVID, everybody moved out. So almost all the church planters I knew ended up in Washington, D.C., Georgia, back here in New Jersey. Church plants closed down. I can only assume that the money dried up and that the funding wasn't there because it's big business, right? It's a business. So I can imagine it's changed a lot, but I have not been so connected to the church planting world over the last 7 or 8 years. I really, I've been working. I've been in churches. I've worked on staff in a couple of churches. And I joined the OPC, so my world is very different now. So I'm not as familiar, but I think that the church, the COVID, and really shut down a lot of these church plants, and a lot of these guys who said, I'm going to die in the hood. I'm going to, wrote books about it, did videos about it, platformed on the campaigned on that platform, so to speak. They're eating their words now. Dudes that told me, Evan, what happened? I thought you were for the cause. I thought you were, bro, what happened to you? They are gone. They don't live in New York City anymore. So it's unfortunate and it's sad.
Dr. Hart, any thoughts or questions?
What do you do? What do you do for income? What did you do? I mean, did you have a job during some of this, or do you have a job now while you're going?
My job at that point, this is 10 years ago, was the church planter, not really getting paid. So I was taking odd jobs and doing things to raise income. I've always worked as an interpreter. So okay. I was working from 2011 to 2016. I worked I worked as a federal interpreter. So I was picking up little work here and there. They allowed me to work from home as I shifted into church planting. And then after that, after the church plant closed down, I took a staff job for a year at a local church. Took some odd jobs, and for the last 4 years, I've been working at a hospital as a program manager. So I've actually, when COVID hit, everybody lost their job. I gained a great job working at a hospital. It's been awesome experience. And guess what I do? I manage a grant from the state that goes to churches. So all I do all day is work with inner city storefront churches in Paterson, New Jersey, and in Passaic and Clifton, New Jersey, getting them some state funds in exchange for them doing health and education curriculums. So I'm still working with these churches, I'm still hearing about their experience. I'm providing like free counseling for the dudes that are struggling, and just doing some amazing work with them in that area until I've got elders in the presbytery saying, Kevin, can you finish taking your presbytery exams? We have empty pulpits, So until the Lord, that's coming up. I don't know when that's going to be, but I've passed a bunch of my exams. I've only got a few more to go, including my floor exam. So whenever that happens, if the Lord is willing, then we'll go into ordained ministry.
So another question, in these church plants and in these networks, how much conversion or evangelism was happening, or was this Christians moving around to different churches? I mean, so how much did the Christian population actually grow, or did it stay the same, but again, people migrated to different churches?
I would say that your core group for all of your core group is going to be this terminology refers to the people that are helping you to plant, and that will help you move mobile church around. Your core group is going to be people that are coming from other churches. So you got what you call your de-churched. That was the language, people that stopped going to church but know all about church and can do church. And then people that are just coming from other churches that are curious about maybe coming into this church plant, because the desire, and this I know from experience, having been a member of churches for 30 years of this caliber, the desire to sort of maybe get out of some of these older entrenched churches that are kind of siloed away is great, especially for young people. I didn't have anybody that could train me in ministry as a teenager and in my 20s. So the attraction of these church plants was great. And so these core groups were formed by people that are coming out. But I think there was a plenty of evangelism. So I want to land on saying it starts out as 80% churched people, but I think it ends up kind of like 50-50 in a lot of these plants. A lot of people are reached, but the question is, are they being reached for real, actual, true conversion? Are they repenting of sin? Are they seeking to be baptized and come into God's covenant people? Are they really authentic conversions? I don't think a lot of that vetting was happening. I think conversion meant, I agree, yeah, you guys are great, and I'm joining you. That was a lot of what the conversions were about. So I don't have a way of evaluating how many pseudo conversions there were, but there was a lot of excitement and people from the neighborhood coming into these plants. And I often wonder, where are these people now? A lot of these plants that have closed down, where are these people? Not part of my church plant, because I kind of know where those people are, but a lot of the people that I saw when we got together for these city to city meetings, where are they? So,
we've heard. Oh yeah. Well, we've heard before. We see some of these city churches. They've got a slogan: "Belong before you believe." So, they wanted people to become sort of converted socially, or to be committed socially to the church, and then hopefully they would believe, or we would love them to life. That's another thing. What we do for people is going to cause them. It's really the old evangelical model. If people like us, they'll like Jesus sooner or later. That's a crass way to put it. But it sounds like there was some of that. and that's what you're saying, that some people were converted to the church and the model in the community, but whether they're part of the invisible church or not is another question.
Yeah, that's not just some of that. That was all of that. That was the way it was, precisely. I regret that. I've often regretted it. But you got to think that many of us were coming from a context of churches that were, in Spanish, we call this rajatablas, which means, there's got to be an equivalent English expression. People were not exactly welcomed in. You showed up at the church and it was you were treated respectfully, but you were expected to really convert and change. The women were expected to suddenly wear long dresses and long skirts, dress formally, not
kind of like holiness churches.
Right.
You're saying people had been used to that in the Hispanic world, and so
Correct.
coming to a church like yours where everything was kind of laid back and everyone's happy, everything's cool.
It was medicine. It was medicinal, but in a therapeutic way that doesn't lead to eternal life at all. But I guess people needed that. Now we understand we can totally love people and be kind to them and love them in a real authentic way and call them to repentance. Now we understand that, but that was not acceptable. I could not do that. I'd be in a long meeting, in a long debriefing meeting, if I started telling people, hey, you need, turn or burn, sort of, which is the way it was painted out to be. So that was not part of the agenda. The agenda was grow the plant. And that's what we did. We had 175 people at the launch. And the sermon, which I was not allowed to give, though I was the planter, the sermon was the third way. And my father-in-law, who was in attendance, says, "What is this third way?" That you left our church, we're okay with it. What is this guy talking about, a third way? And I just, what could I say to my father-in-law? I just had to stay quiet. I didn't even know what the sermon content would be that day. And yeah. The Lord knows why things didn't work out.
So I'm in the South. I'm in a small town suburb, edge of a larger mid-sized town. So what do I know? But it just seems to me that some of these city churches, and I'm thinking a lot of PCA churches here, it seems like the message is, come join with us and we're going to fix the neighborhood or the city or the world. But that's not good news. I'm trying to imagine being a 30-year-old young family man, and I get to this church, and I've been at a legalistic church or a shallow, vapid church, something like that, and I show up and they say, "Oh, we're glad to see you. We're going to fix the homeless problem, or we're going to renew this neighborhood." That's not. I guess if that's what I wanted to do, that sounds good, but that's not really good news. That's a job. That's a burden. That's a program of work. That's the way Machen would put it. What do you think about that? I mean, did that ever? I mean, maybe that's not what your plant may have been more about doing things for people, but a lot of these churches say, come join us in the renewal of the world, the city, the neighborhood, the culture.
Well, you prefaced by mentioning something interesting. You said the PCA churches. The PCA churches are always different. Even the ones that were church plants in the network, there was always something very different in that they did adopt many of these practices, though they adopted them within the context of, for example, the Center for Faith and Work, or any initiative that City to City was doing. You see what I mean? And when you go to the congregation, I at times was invited to several PCA services. And it was because there were some planters. They were calling to worship. they were doing a confession, a prayer of confession. They were reading the psalm. They were doing all of the liturgical elements that are common to NAPARC churches. They were not flouting these things. They were speaking of repentance. It's just that they were doing that plus all the things that you're mentioning, which is probably the bulk of what I was doing. So they were never compromised in that way, because they held on to, the liturgy, a certain philosophy of ministry, which included these doctrinal elements. But we, and my boys who were, looking to the SBC or Acts 29, we had none. We had nothing. No book of church order, no polity, nothing. There was nothing. We were the polity, and what did we know, right? So it was very different for us because we had to lean on these things that were being taught in a way that the PCA churches didn't have to, because they had that structure. And if there was anything compromising about our conduct, oh, that's not the presbytery. That's not Redeemer Presbyterian Church. That's city to city. And eventually the name of Redeemer City to City was changed to City to City. So when things were successful in these maverick church plants, well, that went in the videos, that went on the website, that went on social media, and that went in the marketing campaigns and the financial campaigns. But when we were doing outrageous things, which some of these church plants were, because some of them were even Pentecostal city to city, well, that's nothing to do with the PCA or the local presbytery or the local church. That's what they're doing, and we're just being supportive and walking with them. And here, look, we're offering some theological resources. What are we going to do? Just leave them as they are? So it was always, the PCA churches were always in a uniquely positioned situation where liability was reduced as far as it could be, while opportunities for success, especially with marketing and financing, was at an all-time high.
I don't know how to put this. Of course, this is just looking back, what if? But what if more energy? Of course, maybe they couldn't. Maybe the funders wouldn't have funded this. But do you think long term it would have been better if organizations like City to City had tried to plant Reformed, denominational, solid churches, maybe fewer churches, maybe smaller? And you would have still had church planting just has a high failure rate, just like, it's kind of like restaurants, most restaurants fail. And I think church plants can be sort of similar to that. But I guess what always bothered me about the whole Redeemer organization was that they knew how to do it, and they had the resources, and they had the doctrine, and they had the ecclesiology. But like you just said, they weren't passing that around to everyone. There were maybe low expectations for a certain kind of people. Well, they'll never get Reformed theology. They'll never worship like this. They won't go to presbytery meetings. We've got to let them do it their own way. Looking back, I'm sure you've thought about these things.
Well, I don't think they would have thought that we weren't getting the theology, because some of us were, and which brought many chuckles to many faces. When my recommendation to Westminster was written by a City to City man, and when I told him, he laughed. He's like, "You? Are you serious?" And he wrote the recommendation. It was a wonderful recommendation, but I think that there was a lot more angst. There was some sort of like tribal answer, like, we don't have to be these formal doctrinalists. There's something that we need to learn from our Pentecostal brothers. We got to be more Presbycostal. That was a famous moniker last decade. The Presbycostal moniker was thrown around.
I have never heard that. I have never heard that.
New York City, this is like another world, brother.
Wow.
That was, when we would do concerts of prayer, and we would bring in people like John Smed to come in and teach us how to pray. That was his thing. I'm a Presbycostal, and we're going to learn how to do this. So I think there was just a lot of angst amongst really good, really solid Reformed Presbyterian PCA guys, but that were feeling, something akin to like that white guilt, which was to me is ridiculous. Why are you feeling? I said, let's call it Reform guilt. And I don't know if you remember that dude that wrote that article, Machen's Warrior Children, but it didn't go very well. He was kind of upset about having gone to Westminster and upset about the Reformed doctrine. That was like maybe 5-6 years ago. Remember that guy? It's sort of that same vibe where a lot of these guys are like, no, we need to learn from them. And if you look on City to City's website right now, there's dudes there that are an absurdity to the ministry, coming out of Pentecostal denominations and saying, if you look at their YouTube and the way they preach in their churches in the outer boroughs, you wonder, how can a Reformed institution center a man like this? And it's because he's an Hispanic guy that can reach a bunch of guys in the outer boroughs with ease. So I think, yes, that would have been way better. Instead of telling 50 planters, hey, dream big, you're going to be a big church planter, you're going to succeed, and only 3 of them succeeding and the other 47 guys being unemployed and having to look for a new job, maybe concentrating on 10 church plants and doing that well and making them confessionally reformed would probably have lent to a lot of more of these churches being with us today. That is what I believe. But what do I know? I'm just an OP guy.
Well, that's weird. That's weird all in and of itself, So I'm sure Dr. Hart has more questions.
I think it's time to hear how you came to the OPC.
Well, eventually I ended up in, I had good counsel from people that told me, brother, you've been through a lot. You've been through the church plant. After these church planting experience and these traumas, you were briefly on staff. You need to sit down and stop trying to do ministry. And I listened. And I sat down. I found, again, I was not confessionally reformed quite yet. I started attending an Acts 29 church where I was for a few years. And while I'm there, that's when Brindle calls me and say, hey, Westminster. And I started attending Westminster. I finished the first 3 years. And while I'm going through this process in the Acts 29 church, who also wanted me to be an elder, they invited me. I started actually preaching the last year that I was there. In that process and attending Westminster, I just became, one day I walked into the pastor's office and said, brother, I think I'm a Presbyterian. We talked about that. I shared my convictions. I mean, I was doing a lot of reading. Obviously, my schoolwork, guided a lot of what I was doing. And I opened up a directory, and the closest church to us was an APARC church to us was an OP church. Connected with them, and I've been there the last 3 years. And it's been amazing. It's been like the first time you attend Presbytery, I mean, my jaw dropped. I was just, Ross Graham. Ross Graham, right?
Yeah.
Right, Doc? This is no joke. And the care, the concern, the order, the way things should be done for the preservation of the church and for good order. And it's just, I'd never seen anything like it. The way the brothers treated each other, the way they treated me, had gone through many difficult experiences, including the death of my 14-year-old son in 2021. These brothers took me in like the orphan child. And they didn't reject me. They didn't say you're not smart enough. they just loved me well. And the way, the night that my son died, there was my pastor, my new OP pastor, lifting his hands in the air. Doesn't sound very Presbyterian, right? Lifting hands in the air, crying his eyes out, asking for the Lord's grace. That's when I knew I was home. And as you can see, I'm partially speechless, which I rarely am because I tend to ramble. The experience that I've had has been second to none. A lot of my education has kind of like wrapped up with my Reformed Forum brothers. So I spent a lot of time in their cohorts when they were doing cohorts. And that really just has made the last 3 years just an amazing experience. I was invited by the session to come, would you consider coming under care? We believe you do have the gifting and the characteristics. I was invited for pulpit supply shortly thereafter, and I've been serving ever since. And then the opportunity to serve as a ruling elder came up, which was a need in our congregation. I'm able to supply that need by God's grace. So I was ordained to the ministry as a ruling elder last year, which was just another incredible experience, and just caring for people. In an OP church, I learned to care about people for the first time. It was unbelievable. Taking the way our minister takes care of the sick. I myself am dealing with some health issues, some major health issues. The way the church has cared for me, I've never seen it. I mean, I've seen diaconal care, but the way I've been taking care of my family has left my mother-in-law, who has been very judgmental of every church experience I've had after being in her church, has turned her heart and said, I've never seen or heard of the care and the love that this congregation has had for our family, going through the difficult experiences that we've gone through in the last few years, including grief and also sickness, some hard sickness. So I'm happy to be home, and I'm hoping it's the last stop. It's sort of that experience. What's the name of that pastor? The one that wrote the Message Bible?
Oh, Peterson.
Right.
Eugene Peterson. Yeah.
I've had a similar experience like him, sans the Message Bible. But it's that moving.
That's an important distinction.
What do you call it?
It's an important distinction that it was without the Message Bible.
It's the pilgrim experience, and I'm just happy to be where I'm at right now. If I can use my experience as a church planter to plant church in the future, I avail myself to it. If it's taking a call in a pulpit, we have a few empty pulpits in the state of New Jersey. That could be it as well. If it's being a ruling elder to the day I die in my local congregation, that's also good as well. Whatever the Lord, should call me to, that's what I'm for. But I'm glad to do it in a place that's safe for me and my family, my household, and where I can do good work for the Lord without, violating my own conscience, just to improve on the situation I'd previously been in.
Well, that's all very encouraging. I'm sure Daryl thinks that's good to hear. And
it is.
You're in, the New Jersey was kind of the home and heart of the OPC, so you were in the right place. It's amazing how Providence works out. So I think we've heard most of the story. I did find some of your exhortation videos on YouTube just today. I don't know why I've stumbled across them.
Really?
So
wait,
people can
great,
people can.
OPC exhortations?
Yes, yeah, not
okay.
From way back. No.
Those are okay. All right.
Yeah,
those are. I think those are okay.
you need a friend that works with the NSA to go back and scrub those for you.
We got to scrub that out, right? I would say, but I got to say this. If we want to say in closing, unless these calamities had not befallen me, I wouldn't be where I'm at right now. I'd still be in a very broadly evangelical context, probably doing more harm to people and myself and my family than I can imagine. So I'm glad to be brought into greener pastures, and everything has worked out perfectly for me and my family. So I'm super grateful for that.
Yeah, that's something that I certainly agree with, and I've heard from others who have taken a similar path and landed in a similar pasture. Is like we're all grateful for what happened, in as much as that's what got us here. And so, like, you can't help but look back with gratitude, even though at the time there was real turmoil and hard decisions that had to be made, and amongst many other, that's putting a very silver lining on a lot of it. But grateful insofar as it got us here has been the way I've chosen to look at all those previous experiences.
Yeah, I've got the wrong music for tonight. There's an old gospel song called "Wouldn't Take Nothing for My Journey Now," and that's what it. And we've played it before, but that's kind of what you're saying. Dr. Hart, any closing questions or comments?
No, it was just great to meet you and to talk. And be careful how you pray on the day of fasting and prayer for missions. You might get called to Uruguay or somewhere like that. So
Let me tell you, I get calls from all over the country. It's just, you want to come to Washington, you want to come to Michigan. I've got brothers in Mexico that want me to go plant a church there. I could do it. I could.
yeah.
I can do Vossian Vantillion in Spanish, and people ask me, what is this? Like, we've never heard these doctrines. Like, where'd you get this? Like, and it's just, being an interpreter has its benefits, right? So whatever the Lord says, the Lord could call me to himself before too long if my health doesn't improve. So keep me in prayer. I'm in a decent place, but I've had some challenges over the last couple of months that I need prayer about, and our entire presbytery is praying about it. So it's whatever the Lord decides, whatever it was. I'm thankful for the journey because the Lord has led the way in spite of me. He's humbled me. He's sanctifying me. And I'm not walking into heaven with all this pride. So I'm just thankful for the experience. And what I would tell every young church planter out there, or a young man, you're in a church, you really want to get into ministry, but you don't know what to do. I would say keep praying, continue praying, and seek wise counsel, and don't jump at the first opportunities, because you don't have to go through some of the experiences that we went through to practice wisdom. So anybody that's listening to this, Spanish speaker, si me está escuchando, necesita consejería, alcánceme, búscame. If you need any support or help, I mentor guys from Puerto Rico, Mexico, guys, Dominican Republic, guys that are texting me and sending me messages. And I just kind of I had a guy from Colombia, and I was able to connect him with some of what Camden Busey is connected with out there. Now this guy's going to drive an hour to go to a healthy church, but in the capital. So whatever I can do to help these guys, my heart goes out to them, because there's so many young guys, that they want to, but they don't have it. There's no avenue for them to grow and develop. So learn from me and don't make the same mistakes.
So you can be found at KR Vasquez on Twitter. Is that right?
Kevin R. Vasquez.
Kevin R. Vasquez. Okay. They'll find you, or maybe I'll link to your profile so people can get in touch with you. And do pray for Kevin and his family, whatever those health needs are. We hope they'll get better as you want, and if not, we know the Lord will be with you even in that, and that too. So we're glad for that. So I think we've covered this, and we haven't really thrown anybody under the bus or slandered anyone or anything like that. It's been positive, and but it's a unique story, and it gives us an insight into some of the things we've only looked at from a great distance. So, Resby, I believe it's for you now.
Oh boy. Now the good show starts. No, I'm kidding. Thank you, everyone, for listening, watching along, however you're choosing to take part in the conversation. We appreciate it. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Dr. Hart. We'll leave you all with our wonderful closing music and some personal advice. Never really said this one before, but please don't be an Erdman.
And those who never fail, there'll be a crown waiting when this life is through. And Jesus, a wonderful Savior, will be waiting to welcome you. There'll be joy unspeakable in that new world to come, with Jesus, a wonderful Savior. He'll welcome me in His big arms. Oh, how happy I will be when He comes after me, to join with the angels singing in heaven's jubilee.
What's wrong with you people?